Nothing will crush a real estate investor's spirit like landlord stress. The difference between being successful and miserable in managing properties is education. Welcome to Landlord University, where landlords learn. Landlord University is recorded from inside the Rent Prep office, where Stephen White and Jeff Pearson share the lessons learned from working with some of the most successful landlords.
Welcome to Landlord University Night School. I'm Jeff Pearson. I'm here with my co-host, Stephen White. Hello, Stephen. How are you doing this evening?
I'm pretty good, Jeff. Super excited for today's episode because we got a request from one of our Landlord University listeners to cover a topic, and of course, we're always excited to, interact with landlords and hear their their feedback on the show, and certainly, if they want us to cover something, they're interested in the topic, we'll gladly do it. So anytime that that you're listening and you have a question, reach out to us, or if you have a topic that you want us to cover, reach out to us, let us know, and we're happy to do it. In this case, we've got Randy from Monsoon Rentals. So shout out to Randy. Randy, thanks for reaching out to us.
Yes,
he said,
definitely.
He was listening to the show. He said he was listening to the Google Tools episode that we did, and he said it made him think about electronic rent collection. And so he said that he uses Intuit, which we'll cover as one of the options that landlords can use. But he was interested in Dwolla and some other methods, and kind of comparing the differences between the two. And I thought that was a great idea for a topic. I don't know how we missed it, Jeff, but we somehow never covered rent collection and the different ways that landlords can do it. So yeah, we're going to talk about different options that landlords have for collecting rent. Thanks to Randy.
Sounds good.
So collecting rent has changed a lot, even in the past 10 years, 15 years. When I was renting, you wrote a check, you sent it out, and I remember, renting a duplex where I'd walk the check over to the landlord. Back when I was a renter, I don't think I had an option to pay online or do any of those things at the time. So it wasn't anything that I've had intimate experience with from the tenant side. Certainly as a landlord, and certainly in the industry, I see so many different options popping up. And it reminds me of, the old days where you used to be able to write a check at the counter at a grocery store, and now you can't even fathom that. I mean, everyone pays with a debit card. So
yeah, payment
options change, times change, things kind of become antiquated, and I think that collecting rent checks is becoming an old school way of collecting rent. I think that you're going to see that go to the old days, and there's going to be a new age of collecting rent that we're coming into right now. So I wanted to go over a couple of the different options that landlords have to collect rent, and I figured we would cap it off with some options that they have that are more technologically savvy, or today's ways of collecting rent versus the old school ways of just accepting a check in the mail.
Sounds good. Let's go ahead and jump into that.
So we've got cash. Cash is king, so I can't imagine many landlords turning cash down, but there's definitely some obvious downsides to collecting cash. The biggest inconvenience that I can see on cash is that they're not going to just drop it in your mailbox, or hopefully they're not going to shove it in an envelope and leave it in there, or put it in your door. And we're always talking about running your landlording business like a business, so you want to keep that arm's length away. I don't necessarily want my tenants showing up to my house every single month. So cash isn't the best thing for me.
Right. Well, the other piece to that is they have to meet you in person to give it to you, and then you have to actually go to the bank and deposit that cash. And how many of us go to the bank on a regular basis in this day and age?
Yeah, it's really inconvenient, and when you look at it from that perspective. And I get the idea that cash is better than a personal check, in the sense that cash is never bad; it's never going to bounce. But still not the easiest way. But
No.
There are a lot of landlords that, if they're in a rental office, if you're in an apartment community, or you got a fourplex or something like that, or upper lower, if it's still at a business transaction, if they can walk into a rental office and pay a leasing agent cash, I get it. That's fine. But if you're, the traditional landlord who's a non-professional landlord, you have a bunch of properties, you're running this out of your home, you want to avoid cash as often as possible. If you do accept cash, the best advice I'll ever give, always provide a receipt, because the minute that that transaction takes place and they walk away, if there's no proof of how much they handed to you, that's going to cause you problems down the road. We've covered stories in the past about landlords being successfully sued for security deposits that they've returned, and the tenant went ahead and sued them and said, I never got it. And there was no proof that the landlord gave them cash without having that receipt or any kind of record or transaction history of the fact that it happened. And you're going to lose in court every day if you don't have that proper documentation.
And make sure they sign the receipt as well as you. Both of you need to sign it, and you both need a copy of it.
Great point. Yeah, that makes everyone's on the same page. Here's what you gave me. You're acknowledging it. I'm acknowledging it. End of story.
Yes.
All right. So I would say the most traditional method is going to be personal checks. The positive side to personal checks, I think, is that most people are accustomed to it, and so it's convenient for them. You're not going to probably get a lot of resistance from somebody when you say, I accept checks. The downside is pretty much everything else. Checks can be bounced. Checks can have a stop payment put on them, and we all know that not the reason that the check bounced. You're going to pay bank fees when it does bounce, and so they end up costing you more money. So checks can be something that, and again, more and more, I think landlords are steering away from it because the check is not a guaranteed form of payment at all. Not to mention you have the inconvenience, like you mentioned, of having to go to the bank to deposit these checks.
The upside to that one is, in this day and age, you can actually have a bank account set up so that all you have to do is take a picture of the check with your phone and upload it to your account.
That is pretty sweet.
From that standpoint, it's a little bit easier to deal with than cash. But I would just as soon go through the other electronic means that we're going to talk about rather than checks.
And let me ask you, just to make sure that I'm kind of in line with most people, am I alone in that I don't write a lot of checks? I think I said this in an article that I put together. I only wrote 10 checks all of last year. So, I think that we're just more and more people are coming away from writing checks. Do you write a lot of checks?
No, I think the only checks that I've written or that we've written in the last year have been for things for my son, school and other activities. And aside from that, we have checks that have our address from 2 houses ago, 10 years ago, because we just haven't used enough checks. We've got old checks, same bank account, different address, not too worried about it. They're going to get their money. And no, don't write checks at all.
Yeah, it's funny. I was thinking about it as I'm putting this article together, and I'm thinking, wow, it's so crazy to think about how far we've come in the past 10 years.
It really is.
Paying at a grocery store with a check, and now you want to rip your hair out when you see somebody pull a checkbook out at the grocery store. You're thinking, come on, why not? Where's your debit card?
That's right.
All right, so another form that's becoming more and more popular, and personally I'm a big fan of PayPal. I like PayPal. Jeff, you and I are familiar with PayPal.
Absolutely, yeah.
And use PayPal to transfer money between each other. We have a PayPal merchant account set up through Rent Prep that allows clients to pay through PayPal. I have lots of experience with different credit card processing services. PayPal is probably the most reasonable when it comes to fees. They're the most clear when it comes to fees, as far as identifying what certain fees are. So I do like PayPal a lot, and I think a lot of people these days have a PayPal account just because of their association with sites like eBay and things like that.
Exactly.
PayPal can be free for sending money if you choose that you want to send it to a friend, quote friend. That's up to you and how you interpret their definition of a friend, or if it's a business transaction, but it's free if you send it to friends. And even if you're not sending it to friends, the transaction fees are pretty nominal, if you're accepting credit cards through your PayPal account or anything like that.
Yeah. One of the big things with PayPal, and again, some of the other items that we're going to be looking at, is the ability to automate payments.
Yeah, definitely. And set it and forget it is great when you're dealing with tenants, because, you're limiting their, chances to forget. and,
That's
and
right.
you're limiting that. Well, you get it on the fourth or the fifth, and that becomes kind of a routine. And the PayPal, that transfer is instant, um, comes through immediately. You get notified, you've got money. You open your PayPal account, lo and behold, there it is. So it's an instant transfer, instant transaction. Can never beat that.
Yeah. I think the only, over the last 10, maybe 20 years, the only payments that we've made late were payments where we had to actually write a check.
Right.
And over the last 3, 4, 5 years, as we've eliminated all of those, we don't have that concern anymore. Everything gets paid automatically. We just have to make sure we're putting enough money into the bank account, and then everything is good. And so PayPal and any other option that allows you to set it and forget it is huge. It's great for the landlord.
Yeah, and also with things like PayPal, unlike a check, when the bank presents that check, if the money's not available, the check bounces. With a lot of accounts like PayPal, if there's an issue, they don't have enough money in there, that transfer is not going to get made. It's going to tell them you don't have enough. It's not possible. So
Yeah.
you're way less likely to run into return payments and things like that. When it's done electronically, even if there somehow is an oversight, usually PayPal will put you into some sort of a negative balance before they take it away from the landlord. So it's
Right.
going to be the person sending it that's going to have to deal with that, not you as the landlord. Okay, credit card. So so if I was a renter, I would probably prefer to pay with credit card because I am a big fan of reward cards, and I see rent payment as a pretty large transaction that I can count on every single month, and it allows me to earn airline miles, cash back, depending on what your rewards program is. It limits sometimes what you can spend on, but a lot of them now are just going back to cash back on anything that you spend. So for cards like this, it's fantastic to be able to have that recurring payment every single month that you can count on.
Yes, it is.
So the downside for the landlords is the fees that come along with processing credit cards and kind of the headache of having that set up if you don't already have it set up, or a business that's already set up to accept the credit cards. The credit card fees can get kind of costly. PayPal, again, in my experience from a merchant processing perspective, I love PayPal for that. We've switched in the past from authorized.net and a lot of different services to PayPal because PayPal does such a great job with the accounting, and you understand what every single charge and transaction fee is, and there's no hidden fees or surprise fees. Some of the downsides to accepting credit cards is depending on their card, you could be paying a higher transaction fee. So if you have usually Discover and American Express have a higher transaction fee than Visa or MasterCard. And then the other, one of the biggest downsides that we deal with all the time here at RentPrep is chargebacks. So if you get somebody, like, for example, in our case, we're dealing with tenants who don't understand the term non-refundable application fee, and they don't end up getting the apartment, and now in their mind they just wasted that money and they don't want to spend it. And so what's the best way to get that money back? Well, if they paid cash, they'll never get that money back. But if they paid with their credit card, they can call the credit card company and issue a chargeback. And chargebacks are a pain in the neck to deal with if you're the merchant. You've got to deal with providing proof that they authorized the payment, and at least in my experience, it's not easy to get the chargeback to go your way. So,
well, fortunately for a landlord, it's going to be a little bit easier if you have all of your documentation. The chargeback is going to be for their monthly rent, and if somebody says, "I didn't live there," and you've got a contract that says that they do, you probably won't have as much of a problem with that. But I would take a step back. If somebody wants to use a credit card to make a payment for the benefits that it brings, some mileage and whatever, that can be done through PayPal. That eliminates the chargeback. You don't have to have a merchant account where you would be dealing with chargebacks. So the tenant has the option of taking their PayPal account and having it paid directly out of their bank account or out of their credit card, and they can choose which credit card. So this payment is going to be through PayPal. It's going to be on a credit card, and this is a credit card I want it to go through. And every month it's going to pay from that credit card. So that would be the best way, I think, for a landlord to allow a tenant to pay by credit card. Just tell them you can pay by credit card. You're going to use PayPal.
Yeah, and the other thing I'll note about PayPal, because the the resistance that I often hear for PayPal is from the tenant side that it's difficult to set up, or you need a bank account to set it up, and they may not have a bank account. So a couple of just quick thoughts on that. First off, generally it's really easy to set up the PayPal account. It's one of those systems where they deposit a real nominal fee, usually like 8 cents or something like that, into your account,
Hmm.
and you log into your PayPal account and confirm how much was deposited, and if those numbers match, voila, your PayPal account is set up. As a landlord, I'm very nervous about people that don't have bank accounts. The banking industry is one of the very few industries in this world that allows them to create blacklists, and they have these banking blacklists that basically will not allow you to open up new bank accounts if you owe another bank money. And they're all trying to protect each other in that way. So if somebody doesn't have a bank account, I'm very skeptic and wondering why they don't have a bank account. Okay, so another option that a tenant can have to make those rent payments would be a bill pay through their online banking, or an electronic deposit that they can set up, which would be like an ACH transfer from their bank account to your bank account. Uh, the downside, I'll start with the electronic deposit side of it. Um, you're going to want to have a separate bank account if you're doing that, because you're probably not going to want to give your account number, your personal bank account number, to your tenants, which is what you would need in order to set that up. So I know a lot of landlords that, put each property into an LLC, or, for just accounting and, organizational purposes, everything is separate. If we've talked before about having separate Gmail accounts for those for those different properties. So having a different bank account would be a good idea if you were considering the electronic deposit route, because that way the only thing that account number is being used for is collecting rent. Um, and as soon as you get that rent, you can either leave it in that account or transfer it over to another account. But you want to avoid, obviously, sharing your personal bank account information with them.
Right.
Bill pay. I use bill pay for my own online banking. I like bill pay. I know that being on the opposite side of bill pay and receiving payments, it's a slow process. So it usually takes, at least 3-5 days for the checks to be, received, because ultimately it's the bank that's just hard mailing, sending out a bank check that's written. So you're getting still a check in the mail. The difference is they're, just a convenience factor for the tenant to be able to go onto their online bank account and add you in there as a payer or a vendor, and they can set it and forget it that way, and it'll automatically pay out of their account every month.
Yeah, and that really makes sense for a lot of people. They don't want to go through all of these other processes, but they can go to their bank and say, I want to have a payment made every month, and I want it sent out on this date. And the bank creates it and mails it, and it's taken care of. And as a landlord, it would be nice to maybe get it electronically, but at the same time, in this day and age, just have to take a picture of that. It gets deposited into your account. You don't have to go to the bank to deposit that, or you can mail it to your bank, or you can go to the ATM. There are a million ways that you can get a check into the account. And this is a check being written by the bank and sent to you.
Yep. And, I've seen a lot of landlords with success set a standard or a rule in the beginning and say, listen, if you're going to pay with bill pay, that's fine. But there is a 3 to 5 day lag time. And so in order to avoid any late fees, you're going to want to set up, the rent payment that's due on the 1st, you're going to want to set that up on the 25th for every month. So that way I'm getting it on the 1st. So,
Exactly.
That tenant needs to understand that they've got to have that money available a few days beforehand, because in order for that transaction to go through, they're going to want to have the money in the bank. And then also, by the time that the landlord gets it, now you're looking at the more realistic time that it should be there.
Yes.
Okay, so now getting down into some, tools of the trade. So industry tools that are now available for landlords and renters to use. And there's a lot of good ones out there, and I could probably think of a dozen off the top of my head. I've got pretty good experience with a handful, and I think they're probably the most popular ones in the industry. So I figured we'd just pull two out and really dissect those, break them down, and help landlords understand how these internet tools are working. So the two that I selected was Dwolla, which is spelled Dwolla. Don't ask me what it stands for. I have no idea. But Dwolla and Spark Rent. and each of their websites is just Dwolla.com and SparkRent.com. Now, my experience with Dwolla is interesting because I actually worked with them as they were developing their landlord product. And so they had an interest in how we were interested in using their service and how landlords would be using their service. But they didn't originally start out as a service specifically for landlords. So Dwolla is interesting because it's not really identified yet as an industry tool. But the way that it works, so many landlords were using it, and Dwolla just finally, came around and said, we're going to start marketing this towards landlords because it's become a great landlord tool.
Okay.
So the way that it works is a lot like PayPal in the sense that each party, so the landlord and the tenant, has to create an account. Once they create an account, they can now seamlessly transfer money back and forth to each other. The benefit for the landlord is that it's, again, at that arm's length away from their personal lives, and you're not giving the tenant your personal bank information or anything like that. You're giving them your Dwolla account information. So, it's all set up through Dwolla, and the transaction is ran through them. Transferring money from your Dwolla account to your bank account is free, so that's a benefit for sure. And the transaction fees are really low, probably the lowest in the industry that I've ever seen, which is 25 cents per transaction. No monthly fees, no setup fees, maintenance fees, no hidden stuff. It's literally 25 cents per transaction. And the landlord can choose whether or not the landlord pays it or the tenant pays it. So essentially it could be free for the landlord.
That's a pretty low rate.
It's very low. And, SparkRent is a lot like Dwolla in terms of, the way that it's set up and, the purpose of it and what it's designed to do. It's designed same thing to be able to, for renters to be able to pay directly for landlords, an instant transaction, no turnaround time. The biggest difference between SparkRent and Dwolla is SparkRent's slightly bit higher priced. Still not that much when you consider it. It's $1 per transaction. Again, they have the ability to choose who pays that fee, whether it be the landlord or the tenant. And the transfer time is the only other difference between SparkRent and Dwolla. With SparkRent, it's 3 to 5 business days for that money to be transferred from your SparkRent account to your business account.
Whereas Dwolla, as you said, is 1 to 4 business days.
Yeah. So, a little bit difference in time there, but like I said, Dwolla has become, so popular among landlords. I think a lot of landlords are at least familiar with the site or the name. If you haven't checked it out, it's worth looking into. It's fairly easy to create an account and to invite other people. So if you have a tenant that you want to get them set up on it, maybe you explained it to them, while they were signing the lease or applying for the apartment. You said, hey, listen, this is how I do the rent payments. I use a site called Dwolla. You can send them basically an electronic invite, which is an email that they get and says, hey, this landlord wants to set this, this account up and follow this link and create your account. So it's very professional. It comes across very professional. I think that most people, most tenants these days will feel safe, following that link and creating their account, and they know that they're not, giving their bank information to the landlords either. I mean, it's
Right.
a two-way street.
So for the landlord, if rent is due on or before the 1st, and somebody sets it up with Dwolla, it gets sent every month, say on the 1st. It's due on the 1st. It gets set up to be paid on the 1st. That money gets deposited to their Dwolla account on the 1st. Landlords just need to understand it can take them 1 to 4 or 1 to 5 business days to get that money into their account from the time they request it from Dwolla. But for the most part, again, looking at this as a business from a cash flow situation or cash flow standpoint, if you have that as part of your plan, okay, rent is due on the 1st, I'll have it by the 7th. Then you pay all of your bills based on that. It shouldn't be a problem. You just have to be prepared for it.
Right. What's nice too is, with systems and services like this, you have a dashboard essentially that you can log into. You can get transaction histories. You can, look at accounting reports and everything else, and you can also see when that person is, what they're doing on their end. So when did they send the payment in? So there's no more checks in the mail.
Yeah.
If they didn't pay it till the third, it's going to show that they paid it on the third. So there's no discrepancies there. That's nice for landlords for sure.
And it's good for record keeping.
Absolutely. And, with services like Spark Rent, Randy, who wrote in, mentioned Intuit in their payment network, and Spark Rent is actually a product of Intuit. And I use Intuit for our corporate billing in our rent prep business through QuickBooks. So same platform, same idea. They obviously spin off different brands for different niches and industries. So this is an Intuit product, and I think that most people trust that name. It's a well-respected, well-known name in terms of accounting. And anytime that you're using a product from Intuit or anything like that, that it's going to be compatible with most accountants or accounting programs that you might be using, such as QuickBooks or Quicken. Those are all Intuit products as well. So
right. So if you're using those for your accounting, then you should be able to expect that Spark Rent is going to be totally integrated into that.
Exactly. Yeah. And, you're going to have that almost instant familiarity with, understanding how things are laid out. I mean, I'm sure it's, everything that their platform is designed a bit different, but it's built by the same people. So they're speaking the same language. So I think that most people, it's a very easy transition if they're familiar with Quicken or QuickBooks, to jump over to something like Spark Rent. And again, $1 per transaction, still not a lot.
No.
It's very cheap. So, and something that we always talk about is that professional element. And I think that for a landlord, having tools like this set up it really accomplishes a few things. Number one, it sets you apart that you're professional. You're dealing with this stuff professionally. You've got resources and tools in place for these tenants. You've thought this out, and also, I think something that's sort of overlooked a lot of times in dealing with this, just like I mentioned about tenants not having a bank account. If they can't set something like this up because they're in bad standing with their bank, or they don't have a bank account or something like that, that might be a red flag in and of itself. So if you were, a landlord, and you may have a criteria and say, listen, this is the only way that I accept rent payments, and that person can't do it, then, other issues may tend to surface, like they don't have a bank account and they owe their bank money or whatever the situation is. So sometimes these tools can help certain things float to the surface too.
Yes. And if you're going to require that the rent be paid through one of these options, you probably want to be sure that you include that in your rental agreement or lease agreement.
Yeah, exactly. And, there's a lot of all-inclusive services that are out there as well that have these as sort of like a module in that service. So, Buildium or Housery or Cozy, any of those types of services that are out there typically have some sort of a payment portal or payment module that allows you to basically set these things up. The downside to those types of platforms is you're usually paying for a landlord. A lot of times you're paying for a lot of things that you don't need or you're not getting. So, unless you're looking for that all-in-one management software or management piece or platform, those choices might not be the best for you. But if you're strictly looking for payment options, you can get by with Dwolla or Spark Rent or one of these things without having to commit to a platform where you're going to end up paying a monthly fee, and it's usually $30-$50, whatever it is.
Right. Well, this is really good information, and we really appreciate Randy writing in to let us know that we should be talking about this, because it is certainly one of those things that really is important for landlords to take into account.
Yeah, and I think, I think a lot of it depends on your area, your market, how receptive tenants are going to be to certain things like this. I know that I've done, my share of speaking engagements at landlord associations in areas that I've had landlords tell me, people aren't going to pay an application fee, let alone go and set up Spark Rent or anything like that. It's just not going to happen. So, I think a lot of it does come down to your property, your rental property. But I think for the majority of people, this is something certainly worth exploring, looking into. And unless you're in, an extremely depressed area, or you're dealing with low income and you know that going into it, I don't think you're going to get much resistance from the tenants who say, I don't want to do this, or I don't feel comfortable setting this up. From the landlord's perspective, you can tell them, listen, this is safer than you mailing me a check. I mean, things get lost in the mail all the time. Spin it around back on them, where usually the landlord's hearing that it got lost in the mail. You want to make them aware that that's a bad thing for your money to be just lost in the mail somewhere. So
Exactly.
Mailing is not always the most secure way. I think it's the most convenient a lot of times for tenants, especially if they're balancing things pretty tightly. I think the idea of setting something up on a recurring basis scares them, because they're not maybe prepared at that time of the month to make that payment. But again, from the landlord's perspective, that's a bad thing. You want to make sure they are prepared every month, like clockwork, to make that payment.
Yes.
I'm a big advocate for these these services, and I think that landlords should use it. It's a no-brainer. It saves you time, energy, money, just the gas you spend driving to the bank, or the time you have to spend thinking about the checks coming in or whatever. This is a nice streamlined way to handle it by getting them set up on, some sort of industry specific tool.
Yes. Well, great, Stephen. This was a good topic, and I think that's going to wrap up another evening of night school. I look forward to talking with you tomorrow.
Great. Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks for listening to Landlord University, and remember to visit rentprep.com/landlordu to see show notes and access free resources like forms and guides. And be sure to check out Jeff Pearson hosting his own hit podcast at The Mentor Impact